MedTech Smarts with Rita, the podcast where we break down the strategy, science, and systems that bring MedTech innovations to life. In today's episode, we're tackling a critical issue facing the industry: how MedTech innovators can secure funding at a time when venture capital is drying up, IPOs are on hold, grant opportunities are dwindling, and the path to commercialization feels longer than ever. To help navigate these challenges, we have an outstanding panel with us today. Joining us is Rita King, CEO of MethodSense and a seasoned regulatory strategist. We also have Richard Holcomb, the Chief Growth Officer at MethodSense, and a special guest, Nikin Shah, founding and general partner at Front Porch Venture Partners. Nikin brings a wealth of experience in today's lending models that are reshaping how medtech companies access growth capital. Nikin, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me. My name is Nikin Shah. I'm a partner at Front Porch Venture Partners, but most of my career has been as a healthcare operator over the last 15 years. Spent some time at Medtronic in their atrial fibrillation group, doing some mergers and acquisition work. And then for the most of my career, spent running Polyzen, which was a contract manufacturing company based here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And at Front Porch, I cover all our healthcare investments, which includes traditional healthcare IT, tech-enabled services, but then also medical devices and biotech.
Great. Well, we're really excited to have you. Thank you for joining us today. Let's go ahead and dive right in and explore how smarter funding strategies can help medtech innovators thrive in today's tough investment climate. Richard, we've seen a sharp drop in VC activity and IPOs. What's behind the capital crunch in medtech?
Well, if you think about it, those two things are somewhat related. Right? VCs need exits, either through IPOs or the M&A markets, in order to, get the limiteds to put money back into the next fund and start making some new investments again. So, I think this pullback really began sort of post 2021, and as far as I can tell, it's really only accelerating. I'd say overall, the VCs are really becoming much more risk averse. They're more focused on maybe some later stage things that have maybe already made it through regulatory approval and are doing funding more for go-to-market strategies and those kind of things. And then there's just, there's shiny objects out there in the AI world that maybe are more attractive to some of the crossover type funds. So I think medtech companies today they're having to scramble, and they're having to look for other sources of income, or not income, but of funding. I think in many cases they're turning more to different debt type offers, and then also to partnerships with other strategics that can help them get further along.
Gotcha. So, Nikin, from your perspective as an investor, what's driving this trend toward lending in medtech?
Yeah, again, I think any equity dollars are for a company are the most expensive dollars, but then also investors and their limited partners want to have some visibility of a return. And so, for many companies, if they have raised venture funding in the past, the question for follow-on funding is, how are these dollars going to be used? What's the capital efficiency for these companies? And what's the path to regulatory approval and commercial to kind of getting on market? And so if the company hasn't raised funding, then it's trying to figure out, and so from a lending perspective, specifically debt, it's just a cheaper opportunity for companies. But then there's also some obligation for the company to actually execute, which is potentially driving the debt market.
So, Rita, what about early non-dilutive funding? Things like NIH, SBIR grants, are those considered still to be reliable?
Thank you for that question. Actually, they are highly competitive. And in this year in particular, we see that they are very limited and unpredictable. So there's some cut in funding. However, as Nikin also said, the regulatory strategy remains really important, because if we see situations like what we just discussed, let's say that if we rely in SBIR funding and the funding is not enough, then we have to think more creatively as to how we're going to extend what we got. And I can give you an example. We have a recent example of a company where they created an entire strategy around getting a 510K clearance based on grants. However, this year, this was really challenged with the unpredictability that we were faced. So what we did was ourselves, MethodSense, and the management team, we sat together and we rethought about the overall regulatory roadmap and our path to the FDA. We actually evaluated with the risk-benefit analysis whether we really needed the certain amount of testing, to what extent, can we really can we utilize risk assessments to be able to present to the FDA a more trimmed strategy? Could we utilize some of the bench testing that they had done to be able to still get us to the endpoint? So utilizing those ideas, in a way, we created a pre-submission package, and we had a great discussion with the FDA. We expressed what we were able to do. We expressed how we are confirming the different risks, and we were able to create a new pathway towards the submission and make those dollars be extended. So sometimes figuring creative ways and seeing regulatory strategy as a business asset can overcome some of the funding issues.
Structured loans, synthetic royalties, those things to me sound a little intimidating. So, Richard, why are they gaining so much traction in medtech?
Well, I mean, they're complicated, but in the right circumstances and situations that they can work. And so as the traditional funding sources, like we've just discussed, dry up or become less available, then you start to turn to more exotic types of situations. And in these models, basically it's a chance for the lender to get a little bit of the return post-regulatory and post-market. So it kind of ameliorates some of the lender risk now by giving them a shot at making what would be much more than a debt type return once the companies are successful. So it helps balance out the risk with the reward.
Yeah. From the investor side, Nikin, what do you look for in those deals?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just from our perspective, we are equity investors, and so early on, if we're looking at a medtech opportunity for an investment, either through Front Porch, we have a hybrid investment model at Front Porch, so we also invest into other venture funds. I think part of it is what problem is the company solving and what's their pathway to market. And along the journey, there's a lot of different risks, whether it's product development risk, whether it's clinical risk, whether it's regulatory risk, reimbursement risk, or commercial risk. And so I think depending on where a venture fund is coming in, they're evaluating the different risks depending on the market, right? And then as you think about the debt markets, they're looking at the exact same thing, right? And as they underwrite the loans, it's the certainty for payment. But then also they're looking for what are the upsides they can be taking.
So, how important is regulatory strategy, Rita, when it comes to securing this type of funding?
Yes, Nikin also said regulatory strategy can actually help you de-risk certain circumstances. And demonstrate that you have your overall company and your commercialization plan under control. And I can give you another example where, for example, a company needed to secure some funding. They needed a bridge loan to be able to carry them through the next funding opportunity. However, based on their current progress, investors did not really feel comfortable, and actually they were pretty much letting them know that unless something changes or they see something different other than slides, they will not be able to provide them any more funding. And that is a very difficult situation when you feel like you're almost there, or you feel like you just need a little bit more funding to complete, let's say, some testing or something else to maybe get in front of the FDA. So what we did in that circumstance, the problem was explained to us, and we got an opportunity to understand where the company was and what they were able to present to their investors. So in a way, we start by evaluating the strategy. So everything begins with evaluating the strategy, evaluating the risks that they remain in the company, and then figuring out how to mitigate those risks. In this particular case, in order to mitigate the risks, we needed a couple of different things. We needed to think about a certain communication that had to happen to their investors, but also certain internal organization that needed to happen. So, for example, their design history file, their information that they had, and feedback they had received from the FDA during pre-submissions was not well organized. They were not able to communicate well with their partners. They were wasting too much time in meetings. So we recommended to bring in LuminLogic, which is a platform that can support all the way from your quality management system to organizing your overall company. We brought it in, we organized the company in terms of all the different assets, and we actually sat next to the executive team and prepared the plan for the investors. And we actually presented along side by side with the management team the regulatory plan, how the risks that remain, how we are de-risking them. So the combination of regulatory strategy and a good regulatory platform was able to free them and give the confidence to the investors to put the next amount of funding, and then the company, of course, could take it to the next place.
Lately, there's been chatter around FDA budget cuts, longer review times, but there's also new AI tools like ELSA coming online. What do you think is actually happening behind the scenes?
Right. So ELSA, as I have shared before, it is here to stay, and it will continue to grow because everybody needs efficiency, and FDA needs efficiency as well. I do believe that ELSA will improve with time, but yes, there are challenges right now, and I can share an additional example where, for example, a submission goes in, well-written submission, a product that it is a little challenging, a lot of nuances to it. That means there is cover pages with justifications, explanations, making sure that the FDA team understands where we're coming from, as let's say from the medical device standpoint. So, however, we believe that ELSA may had a little bit of saying to it. So it's possible, because we got some feedback from the FDA that appeared as if part of the submission, maybe they were not well understood. And we believe that, again, as a way of efficiency, ELSA is presenting to the reviewers some additional feedback, information, maybe areas where they need to pay attention. So we got the first question from our reviewer that indicated that something was not well understood. So what we did in that case was that, because we do believe in good collaboration and communication with all partners, and that includes the FDA, we got on the phone with the FDA. We got an opportunity to explain some of the challenges and what we saw as potential issues. And that means early on we could de-risk something that could put us on hold later, could actually create a lot more delays later, and that means for the funding, the need for more money. But by taking care of challenges like that, we can really address them up front. So back to your question, it is true that we will see ELSA and tools that maybe other regulators will use playing a critical role, but then it's up to the industry to continue utilizing creative ways, including, again, their strategy and their strategists, which is like, their partners, to really support them and help them.
Rita, I think that's an important part. I mean, I think we're in a mode now where historically the FDA was often sort of viewed as an adversary that we had to get past, right? I mean, maybe the policeman that's
Yeah.
patrolling the process to make sure everybody stays under the speed limit and is safe. But I think there's a mind shift going on, a mindset shift going on now where it's more valuable to engage with the FDA early and sort of treat them as an asset. Bring them in as part of the path. Ask them questions early on about things that maybe you don't understand or that you think they don't understand, and resolve those issues early, not kicking the can down the road and hoping they just go away. And I think it's a more powerful and viable method for companies to interact with the regulators and get to success quicker, which is getting to success less expensively, which is requiring less funding, and that makes everybody happy. The products get in the market sooner, they cost less, and they're safer. So it's a win all the way around to change that mindset.
Yeah, could not agree more. Because it's also, while there are very specific tools that the FDA is expecting us to use, like, for example, the pre-submission meetings, there's opportunities a lot of times when you have built really strong relationships to be able to have potentially even an informal conversation and gather feedback that can make a huge difference. And one clarification, I have another example where we received feedback from the FDA that it was really traumatic, I would say, because when you get a document from the FDA that it's 50 pages long, the industry feels like, what have I done wrong? And there is no chance in this universe that I will ever get my submission through. However, again, having been experienced, when a company brought us a feedback like that, the first question for us is to really understand it and figure out how can we get the regulators engaged, understand where the risk really is, and once we pinpoint it, then it's execution. And I think that again strengthens what Richard talks about: collaborating, engaging with the regulators, and seeing them as an additional partner.
And that's something that we actually look.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick. Go.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we look for, and I think a lot of venture investors look for, and investors look for kind of prior to investing in a company is, has the company done their pre-sub meeting? What's the feedback? Where do they need to do biocompatibility testing? Where do they need to do clinical testing? And to Rita's point, it's not scary. At least it's just, what are the steps you have to take in order to get approval. And, could it be a moving goalpost at times? Yes. But that's kind of where working with experts from a regulatory standpoint are critical. Same with reimbursement, right? It's just trying to understand, prior to making an investment, we're trying to understand what are all the different risks, as I mentioned earlier, and just where do we stand? Because that helps us figure out how much time and money will be required to help confirm, the use of our dollars.
That's right.
In an earlier conversation, Nick, and you mentioned that investors are getting tired of funding science projects, and I thought that was very well put. And maybe you could comment on what takes you from a science project that in the software world we would have called boil the ocean down to some concrete steps to make it a small enough solution that it can get through NDA and through FDA and get approved.
Yeah, again, a quote that was mentioned to me almost 10, 15 years ago in from an entrepreneurial or startup world is think global, start local, right? And I think from an indication sense, we find too many companies trying to do too much, too soon, too fast, all at the same time. And so I think there's an opportunity to, as you mentioned, Richard, focus on what what is the problem you're solving, go about running the right benchtop studies, clinical studies, and move that product forward. Once you have a product, then you can go back, and whether you decide to launch that particular generation or product first, you can use it as a predicate, or you can use it just to kind of de-risk some of the product development steps, et cetera. So, again, I think it's great from an investor to see a large total addressable market, but at the same time, all of it takes dollars. And you have to ask, as a startup, do you have the right funding to execute every single one of those steps? Or could you demonstrate success in execution, taking a product, getting it on market, getting maybe early sales, and then maybe a strategic partner or the acquirer can go forward and run the remaining studies or expand the indication of use. It goes back to basics, but your customers will tell you what the biggest need is, and we can all do the analysis in terms of effort, time, money, and where to start. But way too often do we find companies doing too much with very little funding. And so, I always equate it back to when I was running PolyZen. You have $100. How do you go spend that $100? You can go focus on 100 projects and spend $1 for each of those projects, or you can focus on 1 or 2 projects and spend $100 on that project or $50 on that project, so on and so forth, but actually guarantee execution. And so I think today investors are really looking at operational efficiency and capital efficiency to make sure that their dollars are going towards not science projects, but actually moving the goalpost forward.
Excellent.
Yeah, you mentioned it's important to work with experts on all these things. So something I'd really like to talk about is LuminLogic. How does it support both compliance and investor confidence? And everyone feel free to jump in there. That's not really directed at one person. I think you all have input there.
I can start if you, and I can actually share that I would like to echo what Nikin said, because as a regulatory expert and as a person that have done a lot, I've spent a lot of years with many companies from very small to very large, from strategy to execution. What I have seen is that once your strategy is clear, the execution, as Nikin said, is so critical. Cannot emphasize it enough. The whole reason for its existence for LuminLogic is to be able to be that scalable tool that can enable you to start from in a very modular way, in a very scalable way, the execution of your strategy, to bring in your remote tool, your partners, your investors, your different collaborators, to organize your EQMS, to be able to get your design controls to look bigger than you really are. So the purpose of LuminLogic is to in a very scalable way, enable the company to execute its mission. And I will turn it to Richard or anybody else.
I'll take a shot there. So, a lot of my time is spent on sort of the other end of the equation on the M&A side. And nothing will kill an M&A deal faster than when you get into due diligence and ask for, what can sometimes be a 40, 50, 60-page list of the items that the buyer wants to see for the company to say, well, I've got a storage unit somewhere that has that stuff in it, right? The deal's over at that point. And so LuminLogic, in the end, will get you through due diligence because it'll all be there in one place. You can just point to it, and the investors can see not only what the current versions are, but how you got to them by going back through the versioning history and who approved things and all of that. But that's just as important up front for organizing the company and optimizing it. So you're not wasting time doing 2 people doing the same thing at the same time because they didn't know the other person was doing it. You need software to organize that. And then moving to that next step, it's critical when you're dealing with the FDA to have the information they need. And once you're through the FDA, well, they're going to show up one day and give you an audit. And when you answer the auditor, "Ooh, you want to meet tomorrow?" Okay. And then you send a message out frantically to your employees, "Oh no, the auditor's coming tomorrow. We need to get ready." Well, if you need to be ready when the auditor calls, and the only way to pull that off is to have sort of a complete system from the beginning to the end that manages everything that you're doing and getting that product into market and hopefully into a transaction where you get an exit for the company at a later point. So it's just critical. It's critical at all steps. Nick, you've seen all the software. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I call it getting your house in order, and the steps to launching a medical device are fairly known, right? You got to build your product, you got to do your bench testing, you then got to do your preclinical, your clinical, go through your product validations. So the steps are known, and so having a platform that can clearly communicate, and we always say once you raise venture funding, you're on the venture train. And what we mean by that is you're going to raise today, you're going to raise a round of funding, $1, $3, $5, $10 million. At some point in time, you're going to go raise more dollars to continue on that journey to launching your product. And, to kind of reiterate Richard's point, the number one deal killer is you say you're going to do something and you didn't do it, right? On the flip side is how do you build investor confidence and eventually lead to an exit is you say what you're going to do and you can execute it, right? And we recognize things don't always go to the up and to the right all the time. There's going to be bumps along the road. There's going to be assumptions. But just having a clear system or plan and just then communicating that plan to your investors, your other stakeholders, et cetera, that's extremely critical. And then just state what are the assumptions, right? One of my favorite questions to ask any of our startups, and we invest in tech and healthcare, is what's the biggest assumption you're making today for this current round of funding? Right. And if it's, I haven't spoken to the FDA, okay, then go speak with the FDA. Or I don't know if this material is going to pass biocompatibility, then go run a biocompatibility test. I'll give you an example. There's a startup that we'd been speaking with, thought highly of the CEO, thought highly of the problem they were solving. And they were raising their round for commercial launch and said, we're going to get FDA approval come in a couple months. And so, given to the tough capital markets today, investors have the benefit to waiting a couple months. So we waited a couple months, and I called the CEO for a catch-up call and said, oh, how is your FDA approval coming? Well, the FDA came back and said, you need to rerun biocompatibility. Right. And so what does that
another
look like?
8 weeks or so waiting.
And so that now it delayed
That's
the
the risk.
company 12 months from commercial launch. And so again, they were out to go raise their Series B from a large venture capital firm. Many firms were in doing proper due diligence to write a $5-10 million check, and now they're having to raise a bridge round to rerun biocompatibility. And so again, it's just, I want this company to be successful. It's going to be a great problem that's going to help a lot of patients and improve quality of life. But from an investor standpoint, it's more time and dollars, right? And so it's just helping understand the unknowns. And so I think a solid plan, platform, operating system, QMS, all that is critical. So it becomes less of a guesswork and more of, execution risk. And then we at the end of the day, we're investing in people. Then we can assess, do you have the right team in place? Do you have the right people around the table who've been there, done that, or who can provide the right guidance to help execute for success?
Yeah. Obviously, utilizing a platform like that is really important. And so from a business standpoint, how do you frame that total value for capital providers, Richard?
Well, it goes back a lot to the idea of being ready. I mean, maybe Nikin just used the word execution. So there's execution risk. So there's science risk, there's product risk, there's patient risk, there's execution risk. And often we see companies that, brilliant scientists, an amazing product that can do incredible things if it really works, that would be a huge boon for humanity. But you just look at the group and you go, this team's just not going to get it there. They don't have the because it's business, right? If you're raising money from investors, then you're raising money to build a business that's going to be profitable and pay back to those investors, and you have to convince them of that. And, having systems in place, things like LuminLogic, but also just knowing what you need to do, having a clear and expert advised methodology for getting to what you need to do, knowing when something goes wrong that it went wrong and how to adjust. It's just being ready, and also being ready on the other side of the FDA. Once the device is approved, okay, great. Now what? Do you have a plan to take it to market? Are you going to try to sell the company to another strategic that can provide the sales and marketing, or are you going to do a licensing deal? There's a lot of ways to bring companies to market. Not all of them require hiring huge sales and marketing organizations, but if that's what you're going to do, then you need to know that and have the people in place and the funding in place to do it, or you need to know who your potential set of acquirers / OEM partners are that can get your product in market. But at the end of the day, you're building a business, and you've got to convince an investor that he's got a good chance of not just getting his money back, but getting several times his money back.
And that is a differentiation that LuminLogic really brings, because it really rounds brings together the regulatory strategy with the business strategy, the business execution. And then it's scalable, and it's the right size when you need it, and it can continue to expand without the need to continue bringing in tools. And it gives you assurance for both the business partners or the business owners, as well as the investors. And later, as Richard explained, it's not just getting through the 510K or the PMA, it's afterwards. It's the execution as we continue commercializing those products and thinking about the next opportunity and the next product. Again, like Nikin said, once we are on that train, that we got our FDA clearance, or we got our funding, we're going to possibly go for more, and we need to be trusted. And that's what we're interested in actually creating, that trust, the confidence, and the execution. Make the execution as easy as possible based on expertise.
Yeah. Since we've got such a great panel here today, I'd actually like to take the opportunity to take a step back from funding. What other priorities do you think MedTech founders should be focusing on right now? And let's take it a step further. From a quality perspective, how can early stage MedTechs build systems that support long-term success?
Well, so not everybody needs the entire quality management system. So I feel like we always go back to what do you really need? Once you understand what you're building, and you have asked the question, is my dream too big? Can I really scale it? Which that feeds to what Nikin was explaining earlier. If I scale it, sometimes I explain the road to commercialization as a ladder. And you have to get to the first step in order to get to the second step, and then continue moving up. So the same thing with your partners, the same thing with the solutions that you need. So it's all about making sure that you understand what's really needed, confirming that you understand the risks around what you feel that it's needed, mitigating them, and then getting to the next step.
Yeah. I mean, I always ask the question, who do you want to be when you grow up, right? And I think are you a product company? Are you going to go build your sales and marketing team? And all those takes money, right? I also think it's important, in the context of if you're going to raise venture dollars, your investors are going to want their money back at some point. And that's kind of where Richard has a lot of expertise on the M&A side. And so who are your potential acquirers, and what are they looking for? Right? Some may just want first-in-man data. Some may want proper clinical sales, right? And it's a moving goalpost because, coming from the large MedTech, having done some M&A work there, right? These are large billion-dollar organizations many times, and there's a new group of kind of, I would call it medium-sized MedTech kind of building. But in terms of the large MedTech, they're looking at what products can I just take and execute, right? The innovator's dilemma does exist. They can iterate at large companies. Rarely do they fully innovate. They iterate. And so the question then is, can I take this product and can I just put it into my sales team's bag, and can I help land and expand, right? And so thinking through who do I want to be when you grow up. If you're launching a product, just having that good understanding, and it goes back to, I think, broadly where this conversation has ended up is kind of, what is your strategy? Who do you want to be when you grow up? What is your strategy? Come up with a plan and execute, right? And if you can do that, it's not a flawless plan to get investor dollars. Investor dollars are tough. It's a tough capital environment, right? You got to be in the right clinical areas. You got to have a team who's been there, done that, right? All of those things matter, but it can increase the probability of success, right? And I think that's kind of where we look at is, it's all as an investor, it's all a risk equation. What is the probability of success and execution, and how do we increase that? And what are the tools that we can have to increase that probability?
It's funny, on the M&A side, I'm starting to see more companies that their goal, what they want to be when they grow up, is a medical device company. But a step along that path is maybe a wellness device that doesn't require FDA approval, that they could get in the market much sooner, and then demonstrating that they can sell the wellness device, whether maybe its market is too small. But then there's a story that says, well, here's our regulatory roadmap from wellness device to medical device, and here's a set of indications that we can conquer along the way through successive submissions. We can become a really big company. We think you, Mr. Big Public Company, who are already in that space, in the optometry space or the cardiac space, whatever the space is that you're working in, buy us now, and cut us a deal that pays us some money for what we've done, but gives us some real upside if we execute on the plan. And that's reducing risk for the founders and for the inventors, but it's also reducing risk for those early stage investors. And having that as maybe not the plan, but an option in the plan, gives you a safety valve that I think makes the investors feel a little de-risked. Like, well, if it doesn't work out exactly to plan, we've always got the option of selling it to somebody else early that can then put the dollars in that it will take to fulfill the big vision.
Yeah. I'll actually provide a counterpoint to that, Richard, in the sense, again, it goes back to the too much, too soon, too fast, all at the same time comment that I made earlier, which is we've seen a couple companies do the hybrid wellness first and then MedTech, or I wanted to be a MedTech and then they brought in the wellness. And while optionality is good, optionality is hard and costs a lot of money. And so we've seen companies where we've seen a few companies struggle, right, is they just undercapitalize themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're a med tech company, but I want to throw in wellness. Well, that may take a different skill set of employee and experience. And then if you only have a few $1 million, well, that was your plan to run a med tech, and now I have to go hire this fancy team who say they've all done it, and humbly, I think we all overestimate our prior experiences to what we can execute today. And so therefore, I think I can launch a wellness product. Well, a B2C product is very different than a B2B. Mm-hmm. And you could do it, but then you may need $20, $30, $40 million, and you may have a different set of investors, right? Yep. I rarely have seen dual use investors, right? Obviously that's in the government and defense industry, but in medtech, rarely do I find a company that says, hey, we do wellness really, really well, and we also do medtech regulated products really, really well. Again, some of those worlds are converging. There was a world, and I'm speaking outside of my experience set, but we've seen that in drug device combinations. Am I a pharma company? Am I a drug company? Or am I a medtech company? And again, it's the same thing. Just figure out who you want to be. It's okay to pivot, but where investors get really fatigued and or frustrated is when the pivot occurs one too many times, and then dollars are then spent, and you're like, how did you spend X millions of dollars? Yep. And we're still sitting here today pretty much the same starting point, or maybe a little bit further. So again, it's just anything is possible. Just make sure you know what the plan is, and then you properly capitalize
that's
towards
the key.
that.
Know what your plan is, and parts in place that you can execute to that plan. Yep.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap, I'd like to ask what final piece of advice each of you would give to a MedTech founder trying to navigate this landscape.
Yeah, I would say, look, this is your life's work. It's a very fulfilling path to certainly help patients, whether it's quality of life or life-saving. It is a difficult path, right? And so surround yourself with folks who've been there and done that. And then just, I call it create your tribe and have your tribe. And your tribe can be on the personal front, but then also on a professional front. Who are the right advisors, consultants, experts that can help you along the way? Because there's been many medical devices been launched, successfully built and sold. And so you're not having to reinvent the wheel. It's the specific technology or how you're solving that technical problem is the unique aspect. So I would just say, surround yourself with good people, and, treat it as a marathon, not a sprint.
Definitely a marathon. I would agree with everything Nikin just said, but my personal experience at times has been, I'm doing this, I'm going through it, I've assembled my tribe, right? And then something goes wrong, something I didn't expect. Maybe the FDA comes back and says, no, we're just not going to let you do that. That's not happening. So you got to be ready to pivot. You can't get dogmatic, right? Because if the FDA comes back and says, no, we won't let you do that, then arguing with them is not going to probably change their mind. So you got to be ready to pivot. You got to have a broad view of what that end direction is and how to get there, and make the best decision with the data that you have at the time. But be willing to change direction a little bit if that's what's required.
Yeah, I could not agree more with both of you, and I would probably say start early, create your strategy. Think about that ladder that you're interested. Sometimes we hear the word more and more of platform, and it's very possible that you may do have a platform, and there are many wonderful ways to get those platforms executed. But execution then is the key. So as Nikin said, surround yourself by the right people, the right platforms, the right tools, so that they can help you when the strategy needs to be changed, as Richard said, so you can get those check marks completed with confidence and with success, so that you can get to the next step of your dream.
All good.
Well, thank you, Rita, Richard, and Nikin, for joining us today to discuss funding MedTech innovations. Whether you're a founder, operator, or investor in MedTech, we hope today's conversation has given you new perspectives on funding innovation in a challenging environment. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to follow our podcast, leave a review, or share it with your network. For more insights, connect with us on LinkedIn and stay tuned for the next episode of MedTech Smarts with Rita. Until then, keep building smart and bold.